Hey everybody, in this video we're going to dive into resource optimization when it comes to Kubernetes limits, requests, and quotas. Now first things first, why would you care about limits and requests? Well, the gist is that whether you're on-prem or whether you're in the cloud, you have X amount of resources available. So because of that, you want to make sure that the pods that you're utilizing or the pods that are utilizing resources are only utilizing what they absolutely need. So let's start from the top-down approach. Now, the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to set a resource quota. And what a resource quota will do is it will set a specific limit or request, which we'll get to in a second, on the namespace. So if I just go ahead and I run kubectl get nodes, you'll see that I'm running on AKS and I have 3 worker nodes. So I'm going to run kubectl create namespace test, and then within this test namespace I'm going to specify 3 hard limits: CPU to 5, memory to 10 GI, and pods to 10. Now on line 12 here, I really do like this one because this gives you the ability to truly specify in your namespace how your application stack should look. Anything above 10 pods, something's going on. All right, so let's go ahead and run that. All right, and as you can see, that was created. And if we run kubectl get resource quota namespace test, we'll see that it now exists. We have our CPU, our memory, and our pods. Now the cool thing is that this is going to tell us the various resources that are deployed to that test namespace. So now any pods that get deployed in this namespace will have the ability to see what's going on there. Now, the next thing is we can actually set up a resource quota for requests and limits, okay? So we're going to go through what requests are and what limits are in just a second, but I did just want to showcase that you can specify requests and limits for the resource quota as well, okay? Now, the next thing is, like I said, the limits and the requests. So if I scroll down here and if we just take a look at this, this is just a standard regular Kubernetes deployment. I'm deploying an Nginx web app, nothing crazy in here, no volumes, no secrets, nothing, just very, very basic and plain and vanilla. But if we take a look at lines 48 through 53, we can see here that we're setting resources and we have requests and we have limits. So notice here how we have memory and we have CPU, but on limits, we only have memory. Why? So let's break down what requests and limits are. So requests are resources like memory and CPU that a pod is guaranteed to receive. And what it'll do is it'll only put the pod on a worker node that's able to give it those resources. Now a limit, on the other hand, this is a hard, strong limit. A pod will never go over X amount of memory or X amount of CPU. Now, you may be wondering, why do we not have CPU in the limit? And there's a good reason for it, and it's actually a best practice. The reason why is because if you have a memory limit, once the pod is done using that memory is going to go back into the available pool of resources. So other pods can use it. But with CPU, that is not the case. If you set limit on a CPU, once that pod is done utilizing that CPU, it will not go back into the available resources. So that's why you never want to put CPU as a limit. All right, so now let's go ahead and run this. All right, and that's created there. And if we just run kubectl get pods, we can see that these pods are running successfully. And if we do a kubectl describe on the Nginx deployment, let's go ahead and put in deployment here. We scroll up, we can see the requests and the limit right here in our pod template. Now, one question that you may be wondering is, okay, I have these limits, requests, quotas. How do I actually see what the pod is using? How do I see what the namespace is using? How do I kind of monitor and observe that? Well, that's where Sosivio can come into play. So within the dashboard here, if I go to Insights and Metrics, number one, I can see resources by namespace. So I can see how much memory a namespace is taking. I can see how much CPU a namespace is taking. And I can dive into each namespace and I can see the resources that are being taken per namespace. So if I go to pods, for example, I can see, okay, in this namespace, it's taking X amount of memory, X amount of CPU. And then if I scroll down a little bit more, it's going to give me even more information around memory, around CPU. Now, the other cool thing is if I go to application profiling, notice here how there's a resource status, and it's actually going to tell me. So like, for example, in this namespace, this app right here, it's over allocated. So if I click on the recommendation, it's going to tell me that the pod might be OOM killed and might cause other pods to be OOM killed as well because the resources are over allocated. This pod is taking too many resources. So not only do you get the optimization piece, but you also get the insights and metrics piece to actually see how your applications are performing. And without something like Sosivio, there's really no way to tell. Unless you're running a bunch of commands and living in the terminal, you're not going to get alerts on it. You're not going to see it from a visual perspective. So that's how you can get started with quotas, limits, and requests in and outside of Sosivio. Thank you so much for watching.